Hello, BookTube. Well, despite the fact that it's dark and rainy and freezing cold here in Boston, June is right around the corner. June is just a couple of days away. And I've been seeing June TBRs on my BookTube feed. All the cool kids on BookTube are doing their June TBRs, and I so much want to be part of that in crowd. I want to be a BookTube mean girl. I want to be invited to their table in the cafeteria. So I want to do a TBR of my own. But those of you who've been watching this channel for a while will know that TBRs present me with a bit of a logistical problem. Uh, Take June 2019 actually as an example. I plan to read well over 100 books, which I can hardly fit into a video even of my own enormous length of videos. So usually what I do on this channel instead is a TBR-BY, a to be read by you, where I give you 10 strong book recommendations for the upcoming month, in kind of the same attitude as if we were browsing the new release tables at a bookstore. And I could just point out to you, oh, this, and this. So that's what I'm going to do. And I broke these down into categories to try and corral my digressions. So the first category we'll start off with is history. And the first one of those, a lot of these books will be things that we've seen on this channel before. I'm just sort of pulling them together from mail hauls and Friday reads and whatnot, because they really do stand out, and they're all going to be coming to your bookstores in June. And the first book for history that I want to mention is Moonbound. It's a graphic novel by Jonathan Fetter-Vorm, and it's a graphic novel about human spaceflight, but also about human astronomy in general. And it's terrific, just terrific. It's not a superhero-y style of illustration, but it's incredibly detailed and incredibly involving. I really, really liked it, and it'll be in your bookstores. And it is, I'm sure you've noticed, if you've been looking at your new releases in your bookstores, that 2019 is an anniversary year for the Apollo 11 mission, and that has caused a flood of books on the American space program and on all space programs. Every conceivable kind of book, from enormous picture books to small poetic meditations on spaceflight. And this is a really good addition to that. This is one to get if you're not sure that you're interested enough to wade through 300 pages of technical detail. Then another book in the history category is The Crowded Hour by Clay Risen, which is a very familiar subject. It's Theodore Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, the regiment that he made famous and that made him famous in return. And it doesn't break any new ground. Again, the book doesn't break any new ground, but it is terrific. It is really energetically told. The best Rough Riders book that I've seen in 30 years. And one of a number in 2019. 2019 has a number of smaller, quote-unquote, smaller Theodore Roosevelt books dealing with aspects of his life, whether it's, the formation of the FBI or a court case late in his life, or this one about the Rough Riders on San Juan Hill. And those serve their purpose. We don't, I think this year we don't have a full dress soup to nuts Theodore Roosevelt biography, but these things work just fine in the meantime. And the Crowded Hour is terrific reading. And then the last of the history books I want to recommend is another really big one. It's huge. It's Sand and Steel by Peter Caddick-Adams, and it also deals with an anniversary, the anniversary of D-Day. And Sand and Steel is a gigantic. It's the biggest of there have been a flood of D-Day books for 2019, and this is the biggest, the most comprehensive, the most detailed, and also the best on not just Operation Overlord, which was the invasion of Nazi Europe, but also Operation Neptune, which was the follow-through, and all the other smaller theater concerns all throughout. It's a big panoramic thing. The author did the same kind of thing for the Battle of the Bulge, and this is just a follow-up. It's along the same lines and every bit as good. So you're certainly going to see it stacked in your bookstores, and I highly recommend it. Lots of other great history titles coming out in June. Lots of others. But these three I thought I would put on my TBR-BY. Then the next category would be biography, my own favorite kind of book. I have only one recommendation this time around. There are a lot of biographies coming out in June. Quite a few of them are interesting. But this one has stuck with me, and so I wanted to make sure that I told you about it. I wish I could put pictures on these videos. But it's called Young Castro, and it's by John Hansen. And that's exactly what it's about. It's about we are all familiar with old Castro, but this is all about the young revolutionary. This is about the guy who was in the trenches and was risking his life and was risking the lives of others and endangering the lives of others. And I don't know what I was expecting. I think maybe I was expecting it to be shallow or partisan or both, and it isn't. It's terrific. So it's the only biography that I'll put on this list, and I will leave a list of all these books down below. I will try to remember to do so. If I don't, be sure to remind me. Then we'll move on to fiction. Everybody's favorite belle of the ball genre, fiction. There are quite a few strong things in fiction this time around. I wanted to mention 3 of them. The first one we've seen on this channel a few times before. It's Fall, the big fat new novel by Neal Stephenson, and this is about a millionaire who dies suddenly and whose will enjoins a tech guru to attempt to upload the dead man's consciousness into a digital state. And it's about that process and about the people involved, and there are 2 other plots that unfold throughout the book, and they're handled fairly well. It's a long book, but where ordinarily I think that this particular author is enamored of long books for no reason, I think this book really warrants the length, because the main plot is that transformation of a flesh and blood person into a digital person. It's just there are a ton of course there are a ton of ideas, there are a ton of philosophical and moral contingencies that come up because of that plot, and Stephenson handles them all wonderfully. I really, really liked it. Could end up being my favorite book by him so far. Then another in fiction would be This Storm by James Ellroy. I can't possibly let the month go by without mentioning it again. Ellroy is an acquired taste. He is a strange writer. Bullety, staccato, not usually any of the interstitial prose type vaporing that happens with even the best novels. Instead, these are just nerve impulses on the page for hundreds and hundreds of pages, and it's a story. I mean, it's a story. It's a historical novel, and it has characters, and some of the characters will be familiar to longtime readers of James Ellroy. But there's a propulsive quality to it that is unique. I don't know of any other writer working today who does this sort of prose. So it can be an acquired taste. It can take some time to get used to, but This Storm is wonderful. Even better than its predecessor in this series, Perfidio. I just loved it. And the last fiction that I want to recommend for June is the fiction event of the year. And that is the New York Review of Books is issuing of Vassily Grossman's Stalingrad, his enormous companion novel to Life and Fate. It's just unbelievable that we're getting a solid brick 1,000-page unedited new translation of Stalingrad. That is just amazing. and I went into it with trepidation. I went into Stalingrad with a little bit of worry because Life and Fate is so good, and Stalingrad is right up there with it. It is. They are clearly of a piece. They are clearly written by the same kind of genius at the same peak of his power. So I'll be really curious to see what kind of critical attention Stalingrad gets in June. The pessimist in me says, well, it'll get barely any because it's long and it's abstruse, and in order to really get a grip on it, you have to read Life and Fate, and what reviewer is going to do that? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some writer for the New Yorker or whatever has been working on a piece for the last 3 months and is almost ready. That would be great. But in terms of just general, ordinary 800-word reviews in normal venues, I worry about Stalingrad. I worry that people are going to appreciate it without actually singing it from the rooftops. And so I thought I would. And then we'll go to mysteries. There's just one mystery that I want to recommend for June. There are plenty that I've read that are really good, and there are plenty more that I haven't read that are on my docket. But one, I couldn't let it go. It's the Satapur Moonstone by Sujata Massey. This is the second adventure of hers of Perveen Mystery. That's her main character, Perveen Mystery, who these are historical novels set in India, and she is the only female lawyer in India. And in the Satapur Moonstone, she is called in because in the small, remote kingdom of Satapur, the men who would have come to rule, both the ruler and his son, have died, and so the kingdom is being run by regents, by Western regents, by British, East India Company regents, on behalf of the Maharanis who are living in Purta. They are living away from men. They have no contact with men whatsoever. So a male lawyer, can't go in to talk to them about any of the concerns that have now involved them. So Perveen Mystery does, and of course once she gets there, she discovers all sorts of other stuff going on. There's all sorts of dark deeds behind the scenes. It's not just a disrupted inheritance. It's much more than that, and it's terrifically done. I fell in love with this book, with this series in the last book, and there've only been 2. So if you're looking for a new murder mystery series to really love, and even in a way, if you're looking for a new murder mystery series to eagerly await, let's face it, we all eagerly await certain new entries in series, and there is a kind of pleasure in that eager waiting, even though it's torture. So if you're looking for something like that, you cannot go wrong with this series. It's just wonderful. Then we'll move on to thrillers. And there's a thriller that I am contractually obligated to recommend to you. I read it and I loved it. It's called Shark Beach by Chris Jameson. It is not his first shark thriller novel. But boy, oh boy, is it good. A family and family friends go to, the seaside for spring break. It's a vacation on their part. It just happens to coincide with a college spring break, so they have noisy college student neighbors, and a whole bunch of things happen while they're there. A whole bunch of things, not just the noisy neighbors, but also a hurricane. And the hurricane damages a nearby military scientific institution that has been experimenting on sharks to make them worse. Because that's just what you expect a military installation to do. And it all comes together in the last 100 pages. The last 100 pages of this book are irresistible reading. So, irresistible trash reading. It's trash reading, but that has its place too. It's just terrifically enjoyable. So I wanted to recommend Shark Beach. But the next category sort of makes up for that. Next category is nature. And the book I want to recommend is William McKeever's Emperors of the Deep. A beautiful and beautifully written book about the world's sharks. That very much reminds you of what Shark Beach and its thriller companion novels, aren't going to stress, which is that sharks are the most endangered animals in the world. Thousands and thousands of them are killed every month. The extermination frenzy around sharks of almost all kinds is so great that it has been for a decade or more severely cutting into the possibility that any of these things can replenish. It's severely cutting into the reproduction ratio of most of the big shark species on the planet. It's a horrific bloodbath. We're almost guaranteeing, that the 22nd century will have no sharks at all in the ocean, except maybe whale sharks and the tiny little sharks. But Emperors of the Deep isn't just about that. It isn't just going to beat you over the head with conservation issues. It's also a wonderful piece of natural history about sharks. Their evolution, their place in their food chains, their nature, what science is revealing about what we know about them, which for 5,000 years has been almost nothing. So that we're filling in a lot of big empty spaces only now in the 21st century. So I don't know where you'll see Emperor of the Deep in your bookstore, but if you do, it gets the Steve seal of approval. Then we'll move on to politics. There are 2 things on the politics level that I want to recommend to you. The first one I had not read when last I mentioned it on this channel. I have since read it, and I'm pleased to report that it is magnificent in its way. It, I think, was born of the wrong impulses, but the book is incredible, and that is The Conservative Sensibility by George Will. A great big brick of a thing, in which technically he traces the roots and the history of American conservatism. But really, it's a lot more than that. Really, it's a history of ideas, and it ends up being, if you read between the lines, and even sometimes you don't need to read between the lines, an intensely personal book. I thought it was a masterpiece, and definitely page-turningly readable. I mean, Will is a great readable author anyway, but sometimes he can get, as the kids would say, all up in his head, and then that gift deserts him, and it doesn't in this book. It doesn't at all. The only reason that I talk about the flaws in its origins is because Uh, I think on some level with this book, the idea behind it, certainly the idea that will appeal at readings, is that there is some sort of conservative norm that that America will return to when the fever dream of racism and violence and fascism, that is Donald Trump, has gone away. I think the idea behind conservative sensibility is that this is something not only that was, but that we need to return to. And Will ought to know better. If that was on his mind, I got that impression reading the book. And if that was on his mind, he ought to know better. He was in a perfect position, as was I. We were both watching to see that American conservatism altered radically with Ronald Reagan and never altered back. And Will was talking at the time about how badly we need to go back to real conservatism. And over time, he adapted to thinking of the new conservatism as the old conservatism. Now he's saying it again. When that is not going to happen, there is not going to be any return to a prelapsarian conservative sensibility. That's not going to happen. But even that informed the personal element of this book in ways that I really liked. I really recommend it. And the other politics book is far more disturbing. I think that it may be a masterpiece. It may be an incredible work. I've only read it once. I got the finished copy. I'll read it again, but I had to recommend it. It's by Daryl Johnson, and it's called Hate Land. And it's about hate in America. It's about socially motivated, socially organized, political, legal hate in America. And its emphasis on the present day, the relatively present day. And it's disturbing. It's really disturbing. In all the good ways, in all the ways that you really want a book to do. You're going to recognize people that you know in these pages. Maybe even parts of yourself. It's a tremendous book, just tremendous. So I don't quite remember the publisher, so I don't know what kind of distribution Hate Land will have, but you should try and find it. If you're interested in the subject, some of you I know have logged out of the culture wars and current events completely, and I don't decry that at all. I've been severely tempted in 2019, more than in any year in my life, to do the exact same thing. But if you've done that, then, for your own peace of mind, I'm not going to argue that you break an exception. But if you haven't done that, if you're still slogging through all this crap, this is a book to read. This is very much a book to read. And then we'll move on. We'll move on from the super serious to the less serious romance. I have two that I want to recommend. Two romances. They are both numbers in a series, but in both cases they are series where you can just walk right on. You don't have to go back to the first one and read. And the first one is frothy. We'll do something very frothy to start with, and that is Some Like It Scandalous by Maya Rodale. This is number 2 in her Gilded Age Girls Club, and it's the next installment in what I think might be the beginning of a tiny new fad in romance, which is to move historicals out of the Regency period and into Gilded Age New York. That has fascinating potential. Absolutely fascinating. I wouldn't mind at all seeing Gilded Age New York become a new staple of historical fiction, historical romances, right alongside Vikings and the Regency and Scottish Highlanders, Westerns. I wouldn't mind seeing Gilded Age New York start to become immensely more popular. I hadn't realized it until I read a couple of them. This is like the third one I've read this year. How much potential there is in Gilded Age New York, how much it resembles a lot of the older historical periods for romance, where marriages were often arranged, where you had a small ton of extremely wealthy people. It would work really well, and Some Like It Scandalous is wonderful. It's a classic variation on a romance story about two people who need each other at first for surface reasons, just to appease society, but then end up loving each other. And I don't remember if I've read the first one in this series. I don't think I have. I jumped right into this one and loved it. And then the second romance that I want to recommend is it's still a romance, so it still has some of the earmarks, the sexiness and the clashes of personalities, but it also has more than that. This author is consistently impressed me. The author is Jo Goodman, and the book is A Touch of Forever. And it is number 3 in the Cowboys of Colorado series. I would recommend all 3 of these books. You get the romance benchmarks, definitely. The sassy back and forth, the sexual attraction, the missteps, the course of true love never running through. But you also get, Jo Goodman brings in other things as well. Deeper issues. Like in this novel, for instance, prejudice. And handles them well. These are big books that are sort of stuffed into the romance genre. I don't know that I'm describing it right, but I really like them. They aren't just romps, and I go to romance a lot of times for a romp, just for a romp. I use it as a palate cleanser from other stuff, books like Hateland, and Jo Goodman's books are good for that, but they're not romps. They have a lot more texture to them. So I wanted to recommend that just in case you're a romance reader and haven't heard of her. Then we'll do YA. Now, this YA recommendation that I want to make will not be for everybody. I didn't think it was for me, and I ended up really liking it. But it takes a bit of a cognitive shift for you to get on its wavelength, because it was inevitable. Of course, it's something that we've all seen coming. It's a text novel. Not that the narrative is written in text instead of verse, but that the narrative is written in the form of text back and forth between characters on a phone. That kind of texting. It's a texting novel. It's called, technically, You Started It. And it's by Lana Wood Johnson. And it involves a young man and a young woman named Martin and Haley, who pretty much conduct the entirety of their relationship via texting. They're not actually sure how they would get along in real life. Instead, we watched that happen. And the author does a fantastic job of conveying that, of conveying the maybe the uncomfortable reality that a lot of young people do know each other through text. Far more than they do through hanging out together at the mall, which was one generation's answer to socializing, or playing together outside, which was another generation's answer to socializing. Neither one of those things happens anymore. Instead, to a greater extent than we probably are comfortable admitting, a lot of this stuff does happen in virtual reality. And technically, You Started It captures that wonderfully, and also has quite a bit of heart. It has quite a bit of heart, because Martin is not the most knowable person in the world. He's not the most likable person in the world. He's shut off even from himself. And the author understands that in texting, in voiceless, toneless, anonymous, quick, single-line texting, there's an element that frees a repressed person. It works really well. I really liked it. Give it a try if you're in the mood for a new YA. And then we'll finish up with a category I don't think I've ever used before. I couldn't think of a category for this. We'll call it health. And it's a book I've recommended on this channel before. I want to recommend it one more time before I stop talking about it. It's Elderhood by Louise Aronson. And it's a study of how we think of aging today. The author points out over and over again in the book that thanks to improvements in Western science, in diet, in just general overall health, and in of course in medical intervention, people are living a lot longer in physical comfort, in physical capability. Their capacities are not as drastically diminished as they once were by age, so that when you reach 70, you have probably many more years to live. And even 70 is elderly. The author points out that nowadays people are spending as much time as elders as they do as children. A long length of time, 15, 20 years, sometimes more than that. And yet, our societal attitudes have not adapted to that fact. And I find it fascinating. The author is a geriatrician and extremely eloquent. And I've read other books on the subject of aging, in the 21st century. It's a crucial subject. It's going to affect everybody. And I've read a lot of books on it, but this is the first one that struck me as a classic in the making, as something that, 20 years from now, this is a book that people will still be reading on the subject. Incredibly thought-provoking, especially if you either know someone who's approaching elderhood. Maybe they're connected to you and you're trying to think about how to think about it, or you are that person. Either way, this is. I mean, I strongly advise that young people read the book because this comes for us all. But nevertheless, I couldn't let the list end without mentioning it because I thought it was terrific. I reread it when I got the finished copy and I just loved it. So there you go. That is a June TBR-BY for 2019. Once again, I'll try to remember to list all the books below, and there are lots of other books in all of these categories. These are just ones I wanted to recommend to you. So I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.